Small historical lies. Vikings did not wear horned helmets. There is no archaeological evidence supporting this popular image from movies and TV shows. The horned helmet myth comes from the 19th century opera productions, particularly Wagner's Ring Cycle, where costume designers added horns for dramatic effect, which would have been completely impractical in actual combat situations. Cowboys did not typically wear the classic cowboy hats we see in Western films. Most preferred derby hats, and the iconic Stetson was far less common than Hollywood suggests. The romanticized cowboy image, including the hat, is largely a creation of movie studios rather than historical reality. The Pilgrims did not wear all black clothing with buckled hats and shoes as depicted in Thanksgiving artwork. They wore colorful clothing when they could afford it and reserved somber black outfits for formal occasions, like church service. The stereotypical pilgrim costume comes from Victorian-era illustrations rather than historical accuracy. Common cultural lies. Mary Antoinette never said, "let them eat cake." Despite this being one of history's most famous quotes attributed to her, there is no record of her ever saying this phrase, which actually appeared in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's writings years before she even arrived in France. The quote became associated with her to symbolize aristocratic indifference during the French Revolution. Albert Einstein did not fail mathematics in school. He actually excelled in mathematics from a young age and had mastered calculus before he was 15. Einstein himself once said the rumor was ridiculous since he had conquered differential and integral calculus well before most students encounter it today. George Washington did not have wooden teeth. When he became president, he only had one original tooth left, but his dentures were made from ivory, human teeth, and animal teeth, not wood, which would have been uncomfortable and impractical. The wooden teeth story likely arose because his dentures became stained over time and appeared wood-like to observers. Humans do not only use 10% of their brains. Neurologists confirm that humans use virtually every part of their brain, and most of the brain is active almost all the time. This persistent myth has no scientific basis and likely originated from self-help books and motivational speakers who want to suggest unlimited human potential. Medieval lies. Medieval people were not constantly dirty and unhygienic as portrayed in popular culture. Public baths were common in medieval towns and cities. People understood the importance of cleanliness, and it often connected to religious practices. Bathhouses served as social gathering places, and people made efforts to stay clean within their available means. Medieval people did not believe that the earth was flat. Educated Europeans knew the earth was round. This knowledge had been preserved from ancient Greek scholars like Aristotle and was taught in medieval universities. The flat earth myth was popularized by the 19th century writers who wanted to make the Middle Ages appear more backward than they actually were. People in medieval times did not die of old age at 30 or 35. While infant mortality was high, those who survived childhood often lived into their 60s and 70s. The low average life expectancy numbers are misleading because they include high rates of infant and childhood deaths. If you survived past age 5, you had good chances of reaching old age. Medieval knights did not need cranes to mount their horses. While full plate armor was heavy, it was well distributed across the body, allowing knights to remain mobile. They could run, jump, and mount horses without assistance. The crane myth comes from much later ceremonial Renaissance armor that was never meant for actual battle. Medieval people did not commonly use chastity belts. Most existing chastity belts are now thought to be deliberate fakes from the 19th century. These devices were not actually used in medieval times as commonly believed. The idea of widespread chastity belt use in medieval Europe is largely a Victorian-era invention that has persisted in popular culture. Scientific and exploration lies. The Great Wall of China is not visible from space with the naked eye. Astronauts have repeatedly confirmed that individual human-made structures cannot be seen from space without magnification, despite this being one of the most persistent myths about human achievements. The myth persists because it sounds impressive and people want to believe in extraordinary accomplishments. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. Many inventors worldwide were working on similar incandescent lighting systems. Edison's contribution was creating a practical, commercially viable electric lighting system, including the necessary infrastructure. British inventor Joseph Swan had a working light bulb before Edison, and they eventually formed a joint company. Napoleon was not short for his time. He stood between 5 foot 6 inches and 5 feet 7 inches, which was average or slightly above average height for the 18th century French men, who average was about 5 feet 5 inches. This short Napoleon myth stems from British propaganda and confusion between French and English measurements. British political cartoons deliberately portray him as tiny to mock the French emperor. Medieval maps did not typically say, "Here be dragons." Only 2 maps from the medieval era have this phrase inscribed on them. the Hunt Linux globe, and the ostrich egg globe, both referring to a coast in Southeast Asia. The phrase became associated with medieval cartography through modern literature and movies rather than historical reality. Ancient world lies. Romans did not vomit in special rooms called vomitoriums to continue eating at feasts. Vomitoriums were actually exits and entrances in amphitheaters and stadiums, named for how quickly they emptied crowds of people. The word comes from the Latin vomere, meaning to spew forth, referring to people flowing out of stadium exits, not purging food. Gladiators did not use thumbs up or thumbs down to signal life or death decisions. The actual gestures used by crowds and emperors were different from Hollywood movies, and many gladiatorial contests did not end in death. Most gladiator fights were like modern wrestling matches, with rules and referees to prevent unnecessary deaths. The Library of Alexandria was not destroyed in a single dramatic fire. It declined gradually over several centuries due to reduced funding, political instability, and changing priorities of different rulers. Multiple incidents, including fires and budget cuts, contribute to a slow demise between the 3rd and 7th centuries rather than one catastrophic event. People did not commonly use urine to brush their teeth. While some wealthy Romans may have used imported Portuguese urine as a whitening agent, this wasn't common practice for ordinary people, who used materials like crushed bones, salt, or herbs. The urine practice was limited to the very wealthy and considered exotic even then. Slaves did not build the Egyptian pyramids. Archaeological evidence suggests that the laborers were actually paid workers, including skilled craftsmen and farmers working during the off-season. These workers were well-fed and received tax exemptions for their service. The slave myth originated from ancient Greek historian Herodotus and was later popularized by Hollywood films. American historical lies. Betsy Ross did not design the first American flag. Despite the popular story taught in schools, there is no historical evidence she had anything to do with the Stars and Stripes design. The story was created by her grandson decades after her death. The actual designer remains unknown, and multiple people are likely contributing. The Boston Tea Party protesters did not dress as Native Americans to disguise themselves. While some may have darkened faces or worn rough clothing, the elaborate costumes depicted in illustrations are artistic embellishments from later periods. Most participants simply wore old clothes and tried to obscure their faces. Witches were not burned during the Salem witch trials. Most of the accused were actually hanged, and only one person was pressed to death with stone. 20 people died during the trials between 1692 and 1693, but none were burned at the stake. The burning of witches was more common in Europe, but not in the American colonies. Paul Revere did not ride alone shouting, "The British are coming." He was one of several messengers and would not have shouted about the British since colonists still considered themselves British subjects. He likely said, "The regulars are coming," referring to the British Army troops. William Dawes and Samuel Prescott also carried warnings that night. Major historical figures and event lies. Christopher Columbus did not prove that the Earth was round to flat Earth believers. Educated people already knew that the Earth was spherical. Columbus underestimated the Earth's size and thought that he could reach Asia by sailing west, which is why he called indigenous people Indians. His mistake was thinking that the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. Pocahontas was not actually named Pocahontas. Her real name was Amadou, and Pocahontas was just a childhood nickname meaning playful one. She was also much younger than Disney movies suggest when she first encountered English colonists. She was around 10 or 11 years old, not a young woman, and her story with John Smith was likely fabricated. The Wild West was not as wild and as lawless as movies portray. Many frontier towns had organized communities with relatively low crime rates. Violence was less common than Hollywood suggests, and most conflicts were resolved through legal means rather than gunfights at high noon, which were extremely rare in reality. Henry VIII did not execute all 6 of his wives. Only 2 were executed, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. The others were divorced, died in childbirth, or outlived him. The popular rhyme, "divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived," helps people remember their fates, but oversimplifies the complex political situations involving religious and political power struggles. If you have any thoughts on this topic or ideas for future videos, drop them in my comments.